Hello, welcome, and a very good day. My name is Abhilash, and I am from the AD Solutions or the Active Directory Solutions team here at Manage Engine, and I will be your presenter for today. Before we go ahead and jump in, and before we take a look at this password security oriented webinar today, I just wanted to thank you all for making out the time. Thank you so much for taking out the time. And thank you so much for being a part of today's webinar session. I understand that this is still the middle of the week, and I understand that many of us are working from home, trying to juggle between family and professional or work life. And I'd like to thank all of you for making out the time and for joining in on this webinar session. Before we go ahead and jump in, I'd like to run a quick audio check because I'm working from home. I'm using my home internet, and I'm pretty sure most of you all are working from home as well. So I just wanted to make sure that my voice is reaching to you well and clear. If my voice is reaching to you well and clear without any distortion, without any breakage in the audio, if you could give me a confirmation using the chat window or using the Q&A tab, that would be extremely helpful. Just say yes, just say okay, just say great, so I can confirm that my voice is reaching to you well and clear. Thank you, Oscar. Thank you, Dominic. Thank you, Adam. I hope the video is clear as well. At any point in time, if you feel that the audio is lagging, or if you feel there's a certain lag between the audio and video, just let me know and I'll do my best to get that fixed from my end. So yes, the entire 40-minute session or 45-minute session today will be recorded. The recording will be shared on your respective email addresses, and the slide deck also will be shared on your respective email addresses. So as soon as the webinar is done, just give me a little time, preferably a day or even less than a day, and I will ensure that the slide deck and the YouTube recording of today's webinar will reach your respective inboxes. If you've got any questions during the course of the webinar, please feel free to use the Q&A tab to keep your questions coming. I will answer your questions during the webinar. And even if I miss answering your questions, please do not worry. I will definitely reach out to you on your email ID. I will get back to you with the answers to all your questions. So please do not worry about that at all. All right. So the topic for today, the agenda for today is password cracking techniques in 2021. How can you protect against that? Right. So why did I choose to speak about this topic today? Now, this is 2021, and it's safe to say that passwords have been around for at least the last 20 years, or even more than the last 20 years. And why are we talking about password security all over again in 2021? Right. Now, the whole reason I chose to speak about password security today, the whole reason I chose to cover the password cracking or the password security aspect of things is because despite applying many security measures, despite using many tips and tricks and techniques, despite educating end users, despite educating employees that work in an organization, the Verizon Data Breach Investigations report found that 61% breaches still involved credentials, basically your usernames and passwords, right? 95% of organizations suffered credential stuffing attacks that had between 637 and 3.3 billion malicious login attempts through the year, right? So why is password security still a problem? This is 2021, and I'm pretty sure many of you have heard of many system administrators or presenters or security analysts talking about password security. You may have heard about different techniques that you could employ to ensure password security, techniques like not using dictionary passwords, techniques like using longer passwords, techniques like combining uppercase, lowercase, special characters, techniques like using a particular shape on your keyboard in order to create your password, and many more, right? Despite of so many techniques, despite of so many tips and tricks to strengthen your passwords, why is password security still a problem, right? So this is going to be today's agenda. I'm going to start off with the Active Directory's password policy because I'm pretty sure most of you all present out here today still use Active Directory as your prime mode of authentication and authorization. So we're going to talk about Active Directory's password policy, right? And then we're going to take a quick look into Azure AD's password policy as well, because many organizations like yours are adopting Azure alongside Active Directory. So let's take a look at Azure AD's password policy as well. And in the second part of today's agenda, I'm going to show you a few video simulations of password attacks, how they could occur in a typical Active Directory environment, and what you can do to find weak passwords in your network, what you can do to strengthen passwords, not just across Active Directory, but also across any cloud application that you use in your Active Directory environment, right? Application like Slack, Dropbox, Office 365, any cloud application that you may use. What could you do to ensure password strength across all modes of logon, not just Active Directory logon? That's something we're going to look into today as well. And finally, we're going to take a look at a simple detection mechanism that you can employ to detect further password attack attempts in the future, right? Because we can never be too careful. Despite employing the strongest protocols, despite employing the strict regulations to strengthen passwords, attacks can still happen. And the only way you can prevent attacks is by monitoring your infrastructure 24/7. And that's something we'll take a look at the end of today's webinar, right? So let's jump in. Password policies in Active Directory, right? So I'm pretty sure you would have seen this already. If you're an admin, if you are a help desk technician, if you're any way concerned with resetting passwords for your end users or creating passwords for your users, this is the password policy that kicks in. This is the password policy that is used to ensure password strength, to maintain password strength in your Active Directory environment. Of course, you can access it from your domain controllers, open up your group policies in your domain controllers. And once you open up your group policies, head into your default domain policy, head into your computer configuration, head into Windows settings, security settings. And inside of security settings, you've got something called account policies. When you open that up, here you see your password policy, right? Now, what's the problem with this password policy? Now, if this password policy was good enough, attacks would not have happened, right? The Verizon data breach investigations report statistic that I just quoted would not have been true if Active Directory's password policy was strong enough, was good enough, right? So what's wrong with it? How can it be broken into? I'm just going to say that this password policy is extremely outdated, right? So if you take a look at your screen, you'll find that with Windows Server 2000, these were the password policy rules. With Windows Server 2008, the password policy rules still remain the same. With Windows Server 2012, the password policy rules remain the same. And as you can see on my domain controller, there are still the same rules, right? The problem with this particular password policy is that it's extremely outdated. Microsoft has not added a single extra rule. Microsoft has not strengthened these policies according to today's password requirements. And that's why users are still able to get away with weak passwords. That's point number one. And attackers are able to circumvent or are able to find a way to bypass these policies that you look at in front of you, right? So these policies that you see apply for all your users. That's right, including your domain admins, including your privileged users, including your users with not so many privileges. These password policies apply to all your users. Now, Active Directory or Microsoft, in order to combat this, they introduced something called password settings object, or they introduced something called fine-grained password policies. But then the problem with the fine-grained password policies is that they still use the same old 6 settings. The settings that you see in front of you are still used by the fine-grained password policies. So technically, even though Active Directory lets you have separate password policies for your users based on their sensitivity or based on their privilege, the rules are still the same, which means they can still be broken into, right? So let me show you a simple example of an Active Directory password attack here. I'm going to open up my virtual machine and I'm going to open up my PowerShell session, right? So as you can see, I'm logged in as the admin and I'm in the desktop path. And let me tell you that before I perform this attack, anybody can perform this attack. You needn't be an administrator. All you need to be is a member of the network or the member of the organization, and you need PowerShell and a script which can freely be found online. All right. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to run a command called get AD default domain password policy, right? So the reason I'm running this command is to try and understand what the password strength of my organization looks like. So as you can see, the lockout threshold is 10, the minimum password length is 7. So I know that all my users need to use a password that is a minimum of 7 characters. And here's what I'm going to do. Right? I'm going to import a script that I have on my desktop right here. It's called the domain password spray script, right? Just a PowerShell script that I have on my desktop. And I'm going to run a command called invoke domain password spray. And I'm going to give in a password. Let's just say password at 123, right? Because although this is a commonly used predictable password, it is still widely used in networks. And let's see if we can find a user who has this password. And once I enter, the spray has started, and it's going to look through all your fine-grained password policies as well. Like I said, you can create separate password policies, but then they have the same rules. So this script is going to look through all these password policies. It's got a function call that basically observes the policies on the domain. And once you confirm the attack, you can see that I've got users and their plain text passwords right in front. Right? It's that simple. Just with a simple PowerShell script that I have on my desktop right here. Let me quickly show you. Here you go. With just a simple script like this, I was able to compromise all my Active Directory passwords. Right? With a similar script and with a list of usernames from Azure Active Directory, I could compromise my Azure's user passwords from an Active Directory endpoint or from an Active Directory server. Right? So this is why the password policy is weak. It lets your users get away with passwords like password at 123. And you saw how an internal user within a few seconds could compromise the passwords of other users in the Active Directory environment. Right? Now, let me show you one more attack attempt. Let's try and target the administrator user in Active Directory. Right? So I'm quickly gonna open up my browser right here. And here's a short video which basically demonstrates the attack that I was just talking about, right? So if you can see your screen, I've got the administrator user right here. I've got a list of 100 passwords in a notepad file, in a text file, and I've got the name of the domain controller right here. And let me show you how this all works. Right? So here's the text file. And let me quickly show you the text file as well. Here you go. And take a look at the attack now, right? I'm simply launching the script. And if you can see, it's going to try all the 100 passwords. And within a few seconds, here I found the user's password. And here is the actual plain text password. And do bear in mind that this attack was on the administrator user of this domain, chbnb. Right? So what just happened here? I simply created a PowerShell script, just a small amount of code. I got a list of passwords which can easily be obtained from open sources like this. So if you take a look at this, it will take you to a GitHub repository where you can find many, many weekly used passwords. Let me quickly try and show that to you. Right. So if you take a look at this, there are many, many passwords here that you can potentially use to compromise your networks in your to compromise your users in your network. And this is how the attack took place. Right? As a non-privileged user, I got to know the password policy of the domain. So I created a bunch of passwords. Now, for the example, I showed you 100 passwords, but you could potentially launch even 1 million passwords in a brute force attack on your users. And you saw that within a few seconds, I got access to the administrator account, right? I repeat, this attack was on the administrator, the most powerful account in Active Directory. And why is the administrator account so targeted in Active Directory? Because the administrator account in Active Directory, it has a RID, right? So every account in Active Directory, they have something called SID or security identifiers. And let me quickly actually show that to you. So if I open up my Active Directory users and computers, if I find my administrator user, right? So this is my administrator. If I open up my administrator account, if I head into my attribute editor, okay, so let me quickly take you there. Users, administrator, here you go. If I show you the admin's object SID or security identifier, you can see that the SID ends with 500, right? So the admin account always ends with a SID of 500, which means attackers, even though an admin tries to change the name of the administrator to something else to prevent attacks on the domain, an attacker can always find out who the real administrator of the organization is by simply running a command and searching for a user with a SID that ends with 500, right? So with a SID that is never changeable, attackers can actually discover an administrator even though their account has been renamed. The other reason is admins, of course, have powerful access, which is why they're most targeted in an Active Directory domain. The third reason is admins, they cannot be deleted, they cannot be removed from Active Directory. They're always there, which again makes the admins a very, very favorable target for attacks. Generally in Active Directory, what happens is the administrator password is reused across multiple domain controllers, right? So when you configure the domain controller, you use an administrator account and the administrator password is reused across domain controllers and various domains, which again makes the admin account a target in such attacks. And last but not the least, admins, well, they have no lockout policy. Now, what do I mean by the lockout policy? I'm pretty sure you'd have seen this. If I open up my virtual machine, open up my group policies, do you see this called the account lockout policy? Now, every account in Active Directory has a lockout threshold, right? So if you enter a password wrong for an account for a fixed number of times, in this case, 10, the account will get locked out. So you cannot log into that account unless the administrator resets the password for the account, right? So this is very crucial. This prevents password spray attack attempts. This prevents password brute force attack attempts. And the problem with Active Directory is that the administrator account, that's right, the most powerful account, it does not have an account lockout threshold, right? So because it does not have a lockout threshold, you can launch a password spray attack. You can launch a brute force attack with 1 million password on this account, and still the account will not get locked out, right? Which again makes the administrator account a favorable target for brute force attacks. Now we saw that the Active Directory password is weak, and we saw that an internal user can break the Active Directory's password. And I showed you how the admin account is targeted in Active Directory attacks and many, many more. Right now that we're all working remotely, attackers are targeting the RDP port, the remote desktop port 3389 to compromise your Active Directory users, right? So the Active Directory passwords can easily be compromised. Speaking about Azure AD password protection, this is what you get, right? So if I open up my Azure AD console, these are the rules that ensure password strength in Azure Active Directory, right? Now, the reason I'm showing you this is because when you deploy cloud applications in your network, when you use services like Azure, AWS, or any other service like Slack, Dropbox, or any other service, any other third-party cloud application, they have their own set of password policies, right? The Active Directory's password policy that I just spoke about will not apply to your other applications, which makes it very difficult for an admin to ensure password strength not just across Active Directory logon, but across other logons as well, right? And this is how the Azure password policy looks like. Microsoft bans a list, has a predefined list of 1,000 passwords that are subject to change anytime. Nobody knows what the passwords in that list are. And whenever a user uses such a password uh, in Azure Active Directory, Microsoft bans that password if it is a part of that global banned list, right? So Microsoft has a global banned list. Microsoft also has a custom banned list, right? A custom banned password list is something that you can specify as an admin, as a security analyst. You can give in a few set of weak passwords here that you think are used in your organization, and they will be banned as well, right? The good thing about Azure AD password protection is that you can enable it for Active Directory. So you can enable Azure AD password protection for Active Directory. So if your users in Active Directory, they use a weak password, and if that weak password exists in the custom banned list or the global banned list that is defined and managed by Microsoft, it will get banned, right? So the problem with this policy is that you can take a look at your screen right here, right? There are many, many problems here that come in with this policy. But the biggest problem is the algorithm that is used to ensure that the passwords are secure is very weak. For example, let's say you create a password that's password at 123, right? And the Azure AD password algorithm does not agree with it. It says, hey, this password is weak. And by simply adding another character to password at 123, a character like an exclamation or a hashtag or any character to that same password, it will then be accepted by Azure AD password protection, right? So what I'm trying to say here is, although Microsoft has tried to improve password security by using better algorithms in Azure Active Directory, by allowing you to connect Azure AD password protection features with Active Directory, the algorithm at its core is weak. And even by manipulating the weak password slightly, your users can still get away with using weak passwords in your Active Directory and also your Azure AD environment, right? And also it's important to realize that to leverage this feature in Azure, you need a premium license, which is again $6 to $9 every month. So that's an extra expense for you as well, right? So Active Directory passwords are weak. They can be broken into. I just showed you two attacks as to how that could happen. And when it comes to cloud applications, they have their own set of rules. They have their own set of regulations. These rules may not all be weak. Some applications actually have strong password policies. But then again, when there is no uniform password policy for a user across all modes of logons, be it Active Directory, be it a cloud logon, things start to get complicated, right? Because an admin cannot keep track of password strength across every mode of logon, right? So how can we help you out? The first thing I would like for you to do in your Active Directory environment is basically find your users with weak passwords, right? Because your Active Directory environment is where your users reside in, and your Active Directory governs access to resources on premises. So find users with weak passwords in your Active Directory environment first, right? And in some cases, when you have cloud applications, the same user accesses the cloud application as well. So the password also may be similar. So if you find weak users in Active Directory with weak passwords, you can find them, you can force them to reset and strengthen their password, right? So how do you do that? You can do that with PowerShell. Now there is something called the DS internals module where you can import that module in PowerShell, and you can give in a set of passwords in a file, weak passwords that may be used in your organization. You can convert those passwords in a file, in that file, to NT hashes or NTLM hashes and compare against the hashes that you receive from Active Directory, right? Do you find the difficulty in this? You need to first import a module, and then you need to create passwords, and then you need to convert the passwords into NT hashes, and then you need to write a code, write scripts to compare those passwords with Active Directory passwords, right? So all of this work has to be done via scripting, and let's face it, none of us have the time to build such complex scripts, right? So that's why we make things simpler for you. We provide you with a free weak password reporter tool, With with our free weak password reporter tool, what you could do is you could give in a set of passwords. Now we give you a set of 1 lakh passwords that you can check for in your domain that are weak. You can add in your own list of passwords as well. Once you add in your list of passwords, you can also run multiple lists of passwords. You can find out users on your domain who have weak passwords. So you needn't go through all the PowerShell scripting, coding process. You can just use this free tool that we provide to simply find users and their passwords if they are weak on your domain, right? You can feed in the passwords with just a text file. The tool will automate the process for you. You need to do it manually. The tool will automate the process for you. And this is the first good step to find users with weak passwords. Once you find users with these weak passwords, force them to reset their passwords and ensure that they create strong passwords, right? Now, how do you ensure that your users create strong passwords? It's possible by using stronger password policies, right? Now, password strength, although it hugely depends on your users, it's important to realize that weaker policies give birth to weaker passwords. Stronger policies give birth to stronger passwords. So if we have a way to update this password policy to have a much stronger and a much better password policy, then we can prevent weak passwords in our network, and ADSelfService Plus can help with that, right? So ADSelfService Plus right here is a component of AD360. So if I open up ADSelfService Plus, head into configuration, head into password policy enforcer, and this is where you can enforce a custom password policy for your Active Directory domain, right? So take a look at the rules right here. The rules are much better than your Active Directory rules. You can set the number of special characters you wanted to use. You can set the number of uppercase, lowercase characters. You can restrict the repetition of characters from an older password or an older username. You can restrict certain patterns like password at 123, for example. You can restrict the usage of certain patterns like this. You can ban the use of dictionary words where you can choose the dictionary that you want. You can add in as many as dictionaries as you want. You can set the minimum, maximum length of passwords in your network. And it's beautiful because this custom password policy will allow you to create the rules, to enforce the rules that are necessary for strong passwords in your Active Directory environment, right? The beauty of this custom password policy is that it can be applied granularly based on OUs, based on groups, and even based on individual users. So for example, if you have an OU that has only administrators, you can apply a stronger password policy to that OU. If you have an OU with, not users who are not so privileged, you can apply a stronger password policy to those users, right? So what I'm trying to say here is stronger password rules that are extremely strong, and you can apply granular policies based on user sensitivity or user privilege in your network, right? The beauty of ADSelfService Plus's password policies is that they work from your native end as well. So when your user tries to, let's say, change their password, the password policy that you just created with ADSelfService Plus will kick in, right? Let's say your admin tries to reset a password, and your admin also will not be able to set passwords like password at 123 because the password policy will kick in, thereby ensuring password security whenever users change or whenever users reset their password, right? So pretty straightforward. What I would suggest is employ this password policy, set stronger rules according to the password security requirements in your network. And using this, you can ensure that your end users don't have weak passwords, right? Now, the policy I just showed you, right, does not replace the Active Directory's password policy. Your Active Directory's password policy still remains intact. The extra policy in ADSelfService Plus works in cohesion or works together with your Active Directory's password policy. All right. Now, what about password strength across the hybrid environment? Now, like I said, it's just not Active Directory logons. You've got logons across applications like Microsoft 365. You've got logons across applications like Google Suite, Zoho, Dropbox, Slack, many more applications like that. what can you do to ensure password strength across all of those applications? The one thing I would encourage you to do is to deploy single sign-on, right? So if you take a look at this year, we support single sign-on to close to 107 applications. If you wanted to add a new application, you can do that as well. All you need to do is ensure that the application is SAML supported. All right. So these are many applications here. As you can see, we've got Office 365 and you've got Google Suite. There are many applications here. You've got your Datadog, using which you can enforce the password policy right here to all those applications as well by deploying single sign-on. Right? Now, what do I mean by this? How does this work? Let me show you a quick video right? So I'm trying to connect to my virtual machine. This is my virtual machine. And as an end user, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the browser. Right? Now, if I type in a cloud applications logon, like Office 365, for example, right? I can log on to that cloud application. And this time I needn't enter a password because I've set up single sign-on, right? So what I'm trying to say here is once you've set up the stronger password policy, you can set up single sign-on. And once you set up single sign-on, the logins across multiple cloud applications will just be directed to one logon. That's your Active Directory logon, right? So if I enter the cloud applications URL there, I will be automatically logged on to that cloud applications URL. And as an alternative, as an end user, I could simply launch the ADSelfService Plus portal. I could head into the applications tab, right? Once I head into the applications tab, I can simply select the application that I want to log on to. And as you can see, I'm not prompted to enter a password and I am auto logged on to that application. Right? So what am I suggesting here? How am I suggesting, how will this improve your password security? This is what I suggest, right? First, you deploy these policies, right? You set policies, you enforce them for your Active Directory users, right? Once you enforce policies for your Active Directory users, set up single sign-on for any cloud application that you may use in your network. Once you set up single sign-on, all your users need to do is log on once to your Active Directory domain, enter a password that must undergo these rules, right? And once they enter that password, they needn't enter a password across any logon, across any cloud application that's being configured in ADSelfService. Right? So what I'm trying to suggest here is one-time logon and seamless access to all cloud applications. Right? Now, this is 2021. This is an era where passwords simply don't work. This is a time where password attacks can come in more than one form, and using a standard username and password, well, it just doesn't do the trick. You need something extra to strengthen your passwords. And that is when we provide something called multi-factor authentication, right? So what happens here is when your users, they log on to their endpoints, they have to undergo a multi-factor authentication process, right? And now that we're all working remote, when your users log on via the VPN, they have to undergo a multi-factor authentication process. So this is how it's going to work, right? Let me show you a small example right here. I'm a user, I'm entering my password. And now once I enter, here's the multi-factor authentication process, right? Where I've received a login request on my cell phone or on my mobile. And once I confirm, or once I say accept the login, only then will I be allowed to log in to my Active Directory domain, right? So multi-factor authentication right here will help me ensure that there is an additional check for logons in my network. And as you can see, there are close to 13 to 14 multi-factor authentication processes that we support currently. You can set up whichever multi-factor authentication you want based on your user preference. For example, if you have users who belong to the older generation, if you have senior users who prefer SMS verification or who prefer email verification, you can set that up. If you have more tech-savvy users who know how to use authenticators like Microsoft Authenticator or Google Authenticator or even Fingerprint, you can set that up for your users, right? You can also set up multi-factor authentication for when an admin tries to reset a password for an account or unlocks an account, right? So what am I trying to say? User logs on using a strong password policy that I just showed you, undergoes a two-factor authentication process. All of this, again, is happening at Active Directory logon, and that's all they need to do. With a strong password, with multi-factor authentication at Active Directory logons, they'll have seamless access to all cloud applications and also Active Directory resources, right? So the question of the hour, what have we done so far? We've strengthened our passwords. That's point number one, by identifying weak passwords, by deploying stronger password policies. We've strengthened our passwords across other logons as well by deploying single sign-on. We've also ensured more password security by deploying two-factor authentication at your native Active Directory logons. Right now, how can you constantly monitor your network for password attacks? How can you prevent password attacks in the future? The only way you can do that is by auditing, right? Once you enable the required audit policies on your domain, you can head into your event viewer, and inside the security tab, you will find a lot of events, right? And most of these events will include your log on and log off events as well. And the key to monitor unusual logons, the key to monitor password spray attacks, password brute force attacks on your domain is by monitoring logons and log offs to your domain, right? So let's try and filter these logs to make things a little simpler. I'm going to say event ID 4624 because those are the logon event IDs. And as you can see, there are close to 1,800 logon events on just my workstation machine, right? Again, a huge number for you to look through. Now, let me illustrate this to you on an enterprise level or on a domain level, right? You've got logons happening across your endpoints, across your member servers, across your domain controllers, across your different geographical locations now that we're all working remotely. And imagine the number of events you'd have to look through to find out password attack attempts on your domain, right? Every server produces log on, log off events. Every computer connected to your network produces log on, log off events. And attacks can happen from any server in your network. And if these are the amount of logs, these are the volume of logs that you're greeted with, how can you monitor these logs for security purposes, for password security purposes? And that's when we make things a little simpler for you, because with AD Audit Plus, we've got certain reports here that basically are only for your logon activities, right? So you can monitor logon failures on your domain. You can get to know from where, which user, from which IP address, from which host has undergone a logon failure. You get to monitor logons across domain controllers. You get to monitor logons across member servers. You get to go back in time and monitor logons. You get to monitor logons across your different domain controllers. You get to monitor logons across the workstations, basically the endpoint machines that are connected to your network. You get to monitor logons that are local. You get to monitor logons that have occurred via remote desktop services, via a network policy server, if you do have one in your network. And these logon reports are more than enough for you to detect malicious logons and password attack attempts on your network, right? So if I click on logon failures, for example, you get to know which user, you get to know which client. You can click on the analyzer details to understand if the logon failure has occurred because of a genuine thing or because of a brute force or a password attack, right? We've also got something called the account lockout analyzer right here that basically analyzes account lockouts on your domain. Now, account lockouts typically occur when a password has been entered invalid or a password has been entered wrong way many times, right? And you can analyze your account lockouts as well, whether it's a Windows service that is probably using the user's expired credentials. Let's say you have a user, let's say you've used that user's account for many Windows services or applications in your network. Let's say you've changed the password of that user, but you forgot to update the password across a Windows service or a scheduled task or anything else, right? So these Windows services will attempt to use your user's expired password again and again and again, thereby triggering the account lockout, right? So it could be due to a reason such as that. It could be due to a password attack attempt, like I just showed you. It could be a brute force attack attempt. It could be a password spray attack attempt. You get to know all those details. You get to know which user from which server is trying to log onto your domain. You get to see the time. And if the time is very less, as you can see right here, it could be an automated password attack. Right? So these reports will come in extremely handy. There are many columns in this report that you could leverage to find out which user, which server, what time, which can eventually be useful to detect a password attack. So as you can see, this is 4:31 seconds. This is 4:27 seconds. No user can log on into a server that quickly. It could have been a password attack attempt, right? So this should help you detect password attacks. Of course, all this you can see here, they are searchable. You can search for specific users, you can search for specific servers, and you can set up alerts as well, right? Now we've given you a bunch of alerts. For example, if I type in logon right here, as you can see here, logon failures for admin users, right? We've given you a bunch of alerts that you could instantly leverage. If you wanted to, you could create special alerts as well. And every time you get an alert, you will be notified via email and via SMS, right? You could set up your own set of alerts. For example, if there are more than 10 logon failures occurring in under a minute, it could be a password attack attempt. If there's a logon occurring outside of business hours, it could be a password attack attempt. If there's a logon from a particular user, from a particular server, from a particular group, you can set up alerts for that as well. And we've got something called an execute script option here. And this basically helps you counter an alert once it's generated. So here's an example, right? Let's say a user is being brute forced into in your Active Directory environment, right? So you've set up a threshold that says, hey, if the user account is being trying to log on to for 5 times within a minute, it could be a password attack attempt. So give me an alert and execute a script, right? So to disable the user who's been broken into, to terminate that attacker session. So you can set up a script right here that basically counters a generated alert, right? So using the script, you can disable the victim user, you can terminate the attacker, the server from where the attack is happening from. You can basically set up a script to mitigate such password attacks on your domain, right? There are a lot more reports here that we can help you out with. If I head into analytics, do you see this report called anomalous logon activity? This will basically help you monitor logon failures on your domain. For example, if a user is accessing a host for the first time, this is anomalous, right? Because the user generally has no job accessing that server, but why is he or she accessing that server? If there's an unusual amount of logon failure on a host, you can find that out as well. If a host is being accessed for the first time, either remotely or either directly by a user, you can set up alerts for that. You can monitor those activities as well. So this is behavioral level monitoring, where we are monitoring the user's logon behavior. And every time there's a deviation from the user's logon behavior, every time a user logs on different or onto a different server or at a different time, you will immediately receive an alert. So this is behavioral level monitoring with user behavioral analytics, right? So AD Self-Service Plus, AD Audit Plus, these are both sub-modules of a parent solution called Manage Engine AD 360, right? So if you do purchase AD Self-Service Plus, if you do purchase AD Audit Plus, you can access both of them from one parent solution. That's AD 360, right? So here you go, AD Audit Plus, AD Self-Service Plus. AD 360 has a lot more solutions that will be covered in my upcoming sessions and by our other presenters as well. But just know that these are individual modules that must be purchased separately. So if you just want ADSelfService Plus, you can just purchase that, right? If you just want ADR Plus, you can just purchase that. But if you purchase more than one module, you can access them from a single parent solution that's Managed Engine 8360, right? Now, before I end today's session, I just wanted to show you a page that we have been working on. It's called IT Security Under Attack. This page has a lot of password attacks, right? So you've got your password spray attack, you've got your password hash attack, you've got your brute force attack, you've got your dumping passwords from the local memory of your servers attack. There are a lot of attacks here where you get to know how the attack works. You get to see a technical demonstration, basically a video simulation of the attack. And last but not the least, you also get to learn how you could prevent that attack with AD Audit Plus, right? So I'm going to quickly leave a link to this page in the chat window. If you want to learn more about the attacks, if you want to learn more about how you could prevent such attacks on your network, then this page will come in handy. And do bookmark this page because we will be adding in new password attacks to this page every month. And you can learn about new techniques and you can learn about how you could leverage AD Audit Plus to detect attacks on your network, right? So this is something I just wanted to share with you because you guys have been so amazing, so patient with me. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your attention. Before I wrap up with today's webinar, you should find a poll flash across your screen in the next second. Here you go. If you can help me out with the answers, that would be extremely helpful. Thank you so much for your responses. Thank you. Thank you for your responses, guys. Much appreciated. Thank you for your responses. I would love to hear your thoughts, guys. If there's anything different you'd like me to do, if you want me to cover a different topic, if you want me to talk more about how attacks happen, I'd be more than happy to do that for you. I would love to hear your thoughts on today's session. Thank you for your responses. And guys, yes, the recordings, the slide deck will be shared to your respective email addresses. So please do not worry about that. So brilliant, guys. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your attention. Stay home, stay safe. I hope to see you in my upcoming sessions, and I really hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you. Take care. Bye bye.